Imagine telling the best athletes on the planet exactly what you're about to do to them. The exact spot on the floor, the exact shot, the exact moment, and then doing it anyway while they stand there helpless. That's not confidence. That's something else entirely. That's Larry Bird. And the question worth asking isn't whether he was great. The question is, how does a slow, non-athletic kid from a town of 2,000 people in rural Indiana become the single most feared presence in the most physically brutal era professional basketball has ever seen? How does he make Magic Johnson restructure his entire morning routine around a box score? How does he turn opposing benches into his personal hype squad? The answer reveals something profound, not just about basketball, but about the nature of dominance itself. Let's rewind to 1979, the NCAA championship, Michigan State versus Indiana State, Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. This wasn't just a college basketball game. Over 35 million people watched it, a record that still stands today. And in many ways, it set the stage for everything that followed. Magic won, by 11 points. By every conventional metric, he outplayed Bird. But here's the detail that matters most. Even in defeat, Bird never looked rattled. He looked like he was already thinking several moves ahead. And that composure in the face of loss, is what got inside Magic's head. Magic, a guy about to revolutionize the NBA, walked away from that game genuinely unsettled. Think about what that means. Bird hadn't won, and he already had his greatest rival psychologically off balance. That's the blueprint, right there. When both players entered the NBA, the league was in trouble. Low ratings, finals games on tape delay. The NBA desperately needed something to believe in. Bird arrived in Boston, a franchise that had won just 29 games the previous season. In year one, he averaged 21 points and 10 rebounds. Boston won 61 games, a 32-win improvement. Overnight, one player. But what he was doing statistically was almost secondary to what he was doing mentally. Bird introduced what we might call prophetic trash talk, a completely different animal from the chest-thumping bravado typical of the era. He wasn't just talking, he was programming your brain against you. When he told Xavier McDaniel exactly where he was standing and exactly where the shot was going, he wasn't being disrespectful for the sake of it. He was weaponizing your own cognition. The moment you stopped playing basketball and started wondering whether he was actually going to do this, your instincts shut down. And in the NBA, instincts are everything. Sports psychologists call the downstream effect of this kind of tactic-induced hesitation, and it's devastating at the elite level, where fractions of a second are the entire margin between winning and losing. The 1986 three-point contest is perhaps the cleanest example. Bird walked into a locker room full of the best shooters alive, didn't remove his warm-up jacket, looked around the room and asked who was coming in second. He then went out, won the entire contest, and released his final shot without watching it land. His finger was already raised before the ball hit the net. That's not arrogance. That's a man who had so thoroughly convinced himself of the inevitable outcome that celebrating after the fact would have felt redundant. Now, here's where it gets analytically interesting, because Bird's dominance wasn't accidental. It was a precise, repeatable system built around a physical reality. He was not going to outrun you, so he made that irrelevant. His footwork operated on what we might call the center of gravity principle. Bird didn't need to blow past a defender. He only needed a few inches of space. Through subtle shoulder shifts, head fakes, and calculated weight manipulation, he could make a defender lean just slightly the wrong direction. That quarter-inch transfer of weight to the heels was all he needed. By the time the shot left his hands, you were already beaten by physics, not athleticism. Then there was his passing vision. Rather than resenting double teams the way most stars do, Bird invited them. He'd position himself in apparently vulnerable spots, draw the second defender away from a teammate, and punish the moment that gap opened. He had the entire court mapped in real time like a living system. Every cut, every lane, every mistake accounted for before it even happened. Michael Cooper, the defensive specialist for the Showtime Lakers, the man Bird himself called the toughest defender he ever faced, described it as playing against someone who was calculating every possible outcome simultaneously. You'd defend him perfectly for 23 seconds, and in the final tick, a passing lane would open that had no right to exist. And even the most physically intimidating team in NBA history, the Detroit Bad Boys, couldn't punch their way out of Bird's intellect. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, guys who would knock you into the front row without blinking. And yet Bird's presence caused what Isaiah Thomas later described as pure panic. That panic led directly to one of the most famous turnovers in playoff history, Game 5 of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals. 5 seconds left, Pistons up by 1 with the ball. Isaiah rushed the inbound pass, threw a soft loft toward Laimbeer, and Bird, who had already anticipated the mistake, stepped in, stole the ball, and fed Dennis Johnson for the winning layup. He didn't just beat you, he made you beat yourself. But here's the part of this story that often gets overshadowed by the highlights. In 1985, at the absolute peak of his powers, 3-time MVP, the undisputed best player on the planet, Bird spent a day manually shoveling 13 tons of gravel to build his mother a driveway. Not because he had to, because that's who he was. That unbreakable connection to where he came from, that refusal to ever separate himself from his roots, was the same quality that made him great on the court, and it quietly destroyed his spine in the process. By the time the 1992 Olympic Dream Team assembled in Barcelona, Bird was lying flat on the floor behind the bench between games because the nerve damage in his back was too severe to even sit upright in a chair. While Jordan and Magic were soaring, the greatest tactical mind the sport had ever seen was managing his pain in silence. He stood on that podium with a gold medal around his neck, and he knew it was over. The very chip on his shoulder that built the legend is what broke the body carrying it. Then came 1991. Magic Johnson announced he had HIV. The world went quiet. And the first call Magic received wasn't from a teammate. It wasn't from a close friend. It was from Bird. For 10 years, these two men had been adversaries in the purest sense, twin engines of a rivalry that saved a struggling league and elevated basketball into a global cultural force. And in that one moment, none of that mattered. There were just two men who understood, better than anyone alive, what the other had carried for over a decade. Magic later said that when the whole world was already speaking about him in the past tense, Bird was the only person who treated him like a human being. That single phone call tells you everything the statistics never could. And when Magic stood at Bird's jersey retirement ceremony and told the crowd that Larry Bird had told only one lie in his entire career, that there would someday be another Larry Bird, he wasn't just honoring a rival. He was closing a chapter in sports history that will never be reopened. 3 NBA championships, 3 consecutive MVP awards, a feat achieved by only Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell before him, 12 All-Star appearances, a Rookie of the Year trophy, a rivalry that rescued a league, and a legacy that Kobe Bryant studied, that Shaquille O'Neal eventually had to respect, and that Pat Riley immortalized when he said, "If I needed one shot to win a game, I'd choose Michael Jordan. But if I needed one shot to save my life, I'd choose Larry Bird." Here's what Larry Bird actually teaches us, stripped of nostalgia and highlight reels. Dominance isn't always physical. The most durable form of competitive advantage is psychological. The ability to make an opponent doubt themselves before the action even begins. Constraints create creativity. Bird couldn't rely on athleticism, so he mastered everything else. Footwork, vision, timing, preparation. The very limitations placed on him forced the development of a complete game that no one could fully solve. And legacy is built in the margins. 3 MVPs and 3 rings tell part of the story. But the moments that endure? A warm-up jacket that never came off. A finger raised before the ball hit the net. A phone call to a rival in crisis. Larry Bird wasn't simply a basketball player. He was a case study in how the mind, when properly weaponized, becomes the most powerful tool in any competitive arena. The most dangerous player in the room is rarely the most obvious one, and there will never, ever be another Larry Bird.